Imagine this. You are a priest in the year 1396. You're standing in the cold stone halls of Westminster Abbey. Your breath turns to mist in the autumn air. You hold your prayer book tightly as servants rush by, preparing for a royal wedding unlike anything you've seen before. The whispers round the court speak of a strange marriage. A young French princess has arrived. They say she's the daughter of the King of France himself. You've blessed many noble weddings, but today the mood feels different. The great wooden doors swing open. The wedding party enters. You can't believe your eyes. The groom, King Richard II, is 29 years old, tall, handsome. His golden hair catches the colored light through the stained glass windows. He stands proud and royal, but beside him walks a child. She barely reaches his elbow. Her tiny hand is completely swallowed in his. She looks no older than 6 or 7. She wears a fancy French dress. Her dark hair is braided with pearls too heavy for her small head. You steady yourself against the altar. This is Isabella of Valois. She is the new Queen of England. You've seen young brides before, some as young as 12. But this feels different. Even in these times, when the plague has taken half the population and kings must act quickly, a bride this young is rare. Still, marriages are political tools. They build peace faster than armies. And now, England and France are tired of fighting. As the ceremony begins, you glance at the little girl's face. She's not crying, not scared, just wide-eyed and curious. She looks around at the tall church. Arches, the flickering candles, the rich nobles in their velvet clothes. When Richard says his vows, his voice is soft, protective. He is not a monster. He isn't marrying her out of lust. This is strategy. Peace through marriage. Everyone knows. The union won't be physical. Not until she's older. For now, she will be raised in the English court. You bless their marriage. Your voice is steady, but your heart is uneasy. You wonder what will happen to this small girl in the cruel world of kings and politics. This marriage is not a love story. It's a deal, a smart one. A move to end one of Europe's longest and bloodiest wars. The 100 Years' War. To understand Isabella's story, we must look at her past. She was born on November 9th, 1389, at the Louvre Palace in Paris. Her father was King Charles VI of France, but he wasn't a stable man. He suffered from madness. History remembers him as Charles the Mad. Sometimes he forgot who he was. Other times he thought he was made of glass and refused to move, afraid he'd shatter. He could go months without bathing. The palace was full of fear during his episodes. Little Isabella must have grown up in confusion. One day her father played with her. The next, he might scream at ghosts or hide from imaginary assassins. Servants would rush her away during his breakdowns, but she saw it all. Her mother, Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, tried to hold the kingdom together. She was clever, powerful, and politically sharp. She saw Isabella not just as a daughter, but as a valuable piece in a political game. And it was a dangerous game. France and England had been at war for nearly 60 years. Villages were destroyed. Armies marched back and forth. Both sides were tired, broke, and desperate for peace. That's where Isabella came in. The idea of marrying her too. King Richard II came up in 1395. Richard's first wife, Anne of Bohemia, had died from the plague the year before. She had been kind and loved by the English people. Her death crushed Richard. He had no children and no queen. His advisors pushed him to remarry. A king needed an heir. But Richard hesitated. He truly loved Anne. Then French ambassadors arrived with an offer. They would give Richard the hand of their king's daughter, Isabella, plus a dowry of 800,000 francs, a fortune, and more, a 28-year truce. That meant peace for an entire generation. There was just one problem. Isabella was only 6. Even in medieval times, this was very young. Royal brides were usually at least in their teens, but the French argued that her youth was a benefit. She would grow up English. She would be shaped by the court, trained to be a true English queen. Some of Richard's advisors agreed. The money would help England recover from war. The truce would buy time to deal with other threats like Scotland and Ireland. But others were uncomfortable. A child bride, even for a king. Then Richard saw Isabella's portrait. His face softened. People whispered that maybe he saw more than a political deal. Maybe he saw a child who needed protection. Maybe, childless and lonely, he saw a chance to be a father too. Talks went on for months. Every part of Isabella's future was negotiated. She could keep her French servants. She could follow French customs. She could write to her family. And most importantly, the marriage would not be consummated until she was of age, while diplomats wrote treaties and sealed them with wax. Little Isabella played with her dolls. She had no idea her life was being planned out by strangers. She started learning English phrases. Seamstresses made gowns for her wedding. She was told she would marry a great king across the sea. But at 6 years old, that meant as little to her as the fairy tales her nurses told at night. The wedding didn't happen just once, it happened twice. The first was in Calais, English land on French soil. It was a small, private ceremony on October 31st, 1396. Isabella wore a gold gown, so heavy with pearls she needed help to walk. King Richard knelt to her level to give her the ring. He lifted her chin gently when she looked scared. A year later, she was crowned queen in Westminster Abbey. Crowds rushed to see the child queen. Some were even crushed in the chaos. England had never seen such a young royal bride. Isabella rode through the streets in a decorated litter, her crown made especially small for her head. English duchesses walked beside her, chosen to be her guardians and teachers. She waved at the cheering crowd, even though she barely understood their language. The coronation feast lasted 3 days. There were musicians, plays, and endless food. Everyone hoped the marriage would bring a bright future, but some nobles whispered that peace was weakness. They didn't trust Richard's love for diplomacy over war. Still, for now, Isabella was safe. Richard gave her rooms in Westminster Palace. Her household mixed French and English servants. She took daily lessons in language, manners, and English customs. She learned to curtsy, to sip wine instead of ale, and to speak English with the right accent. Richard often visited her. He brought her exotic birds, beautiful books, and musical instruments. He seemed to enjoy being with her, and she began to look forward to his visits. Their bond was odd, not husband and wife, but more like father and daughter. She wasn't alone. Many noble children lived at court, raised together. Isabella made friends. Her closest companion was Margaret Holland, just a bit older than her. Margaret taught her English games, court secrets, and which servants could be trusted. They would sit for hours in the garden, doing needlework, while Margaret explained the hidden rivalries in English politics. Isabella listened carefully. She started asking deep questions. Why do the nobles here watch each other so closely? She once asked, Margaret explained that Richard's rule had always been troubled. Some nobles hated his favourites. Others thought he ignored their advice. He's strong now, Margaret said. But in England, power is always shared. Your marriage helped him, but some think it shows he fears war. Isabella took all of this in. She watched how people behaved when Richard walked into a room. She saw the fear in her own servants when politics were mentioned. At just 8 years old, she was starting to understand how fragile power really was. The next 2 years passed quietly. Isabella grew more confident. She spoke English well. She felt at home in the cold halls of Westminster. She studied history, read books in 2 languages, and loved lessons with maps. Her teacher, Master William, would lay maps across the floor and say, "This thin strip of water between France and England, it has been a wall, but your marriage makes it a bridge." Isabella understood. She was more than a little girl. She was a living symbol of peace. But symbols are easy to break. In 1399, she felt a change. People grew quiet when she entered rooms. Her ladies exchanged worried looks. Even Margaret seemed distant. Richard stopped visiting as often. He seemed troubled. He stared out windows for hours. The gifts stopped coming. Then something happened. One morning, some of her English ladies had vanished. No one gave clear answers. She looked outside and saw armed men in strange uniforms. That evening, Margaret rushed into her room. "You must pack," she said. "Only what you need. We're leaving tonight." "Where are we going?" Isabella asked, frightened. "To the Tower," Margaret replied. "The king says it's for your safety." But she didn't finish her sentence. The Tower of London was cold. Stone walls, thick wooden doors, narrow staircases. It felt more like a prison than a palace. And for little Queen Isabella, it quickly became clear she was no longer protected. By her crown, at first her ladies told her it was just a precaution. "There's unrest," they said. "The king will return soon." But as the days passed, and then weeks, Isabella began to understand that something terrible had happened. There were no more tutors, no more music lessons. Her French letters from home stopped coming. Guards now stood at every doorway. Their eyes didn't meet hers. Her once bright chambers were now quiet and cold. No Richard, no visitors. And then, one morning, Margaret sat beside her and finally told her the truth. "Your husband, the king... has been taken." Isabella froze. King Richard II had been captured by his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, a powerful noble who had once been banished from England. But when Richard left the country to fight in Ireland, Henry returned. With an army, the nobles, fed up with Richard's rule, supported him. Even the common people cheered Henry on. Now Richard was a prisoner, and Henry had taken the crown. Isabella didn't cry, not right away. She just stared at the wall. She had been queen for barely 3 years. Now, at the age of 9, she was nothing. What would happen to her? She wasn't English by blood, and now, without a royal husband, she was no longer part of the ruling family. Some whispered she would be sent back to France. Others feared she might be kept hostage. Henry IV, the new king, faced a problem. Isabella was still a child. Killing or harming her would be seen as monstrous, but letting her go would risk upsetting France. He chose a middle path. He allowed her to stay in England, under careful watch, while he negotiated with the French court. Isabella's status was uncertain. She was no longer queen, but not yet released. She lived in quiet isolation. Her ladies-in-waiting were reduced. Her dresses were no longer of fine silks, but simple cloth. Even Margaret, her closest friend, was sent away for a time. She missed her family, her mother, her sisters. Even the strange coldness of the Louvre. Sometimes, at night, she would whisper into her pillow, "Papa, I want to come home." But no one answered. Back in France, Queen Isabeau was furious. She demanded her daughter's return. She wrote letters. She called English ambassadors liars and thieves. And she reminded Henry IV that Isabella had been promised protection. But diplomacy is slow. Months passed. Then, finally, a message arrived. The French king would agree to peace, but only if Isabella was returned unharmed with her dowry intact. Henry IV agreed, but with one condition. Isabella must renounce any claim to the English throne. It was a cruel formality. She was a child. She had no real power. But still, she was forced to sign the papers. Her hand shook as she wrote, not because she understood the politics, but because, deep down, she knew she was giving up something forever that winter. She boarded a ship in Dover. The wind was sharp. Waves crashed over the wooden sides. She held her nurse's hand tightly as the English shore faded behind her. She whispered, "Goodbye, Richard." When she arrived in France, she was greeted not with celebration, but sorrow. Her mother wept upon seeing her. "My child," she said, holding her face, "what have they done to you?" Isabella had grown thinner, pale. She didn't laugh like before. She didn't ask about parties or music. Her French had returned, but her voice was quieter now, as if she were always listening for something. The French court tried to restore her joy. Her sisters danced with her. Her uncles brought her gifts. But Isabella stayed withdrawn. Something inside her had shifted. She still loved Richard, even though she hadn't seen him for a year. Even though she was just a child. She spoke of him like a widow. Then came the worst news of all. Richard was dead. The official story said he had died of starvation in prison. Others whispered he had been murdered on King Henry's orders. No one knew for sure. But for Isabella, the effect was the same. She locked herself in her room for days. She refused food, refused to speak. She wore black every day. She told her mother she would never remarry. She was 10 years old. Some thought she would fall into madness like her father. But eventually, slowly, she recovered. Her mother reminded her, "You are still a princess of France. You still have a future." And the court began preparing her for a new marriage. This time, it would be to someone her own age. Charles, Duke of Orleans, her cousin. He was 11. The idea didn't please Isabella. She still considered herself Richard's widow. But her mother insisted. The match would keep her within the royal family. It would restore her position. And, perhaps most important, it would help keep the peace. Isabella resisted. But she was older now. Wiser. She knew saying no didn't change the world, so she agreed. They were married in 1406, when Isabella was 16. This time, it was a different kind of wedding. There were still fine clothes and gold rings, but no illusions. Isabella entered the marriage with her eyes wide open. She treated Charles kindly. He was intelligent, poetic, gentle, but she never gave him her heart, that belonged to someone lost. For the next 2 years, she lived a quiet life. She focused on her duties. She supported the arts. She tried to build a new identity, not as a queen, not as a widow, but as a woman in her own right. Then, in 1409, Isabella became pregnant. For the first time in years, she felt real joy. She placed her hand over her growing belly and whispered, "You will have everything I didn't." But fate had one last cruelty left. She died giving birth. She was just 19. Her daughter didn't survive either. France mourned her. England barely remembered her. Isabella of Valois, the little girl queen, the child who walked beside a king, who wore pearls too heavy for her neck, who crossed oceans for peace, was gone. History filed her name among the quiet, tragic figures, but sometimes, in the old halls of Westminster, people say they still see her. A child, in gold silk, standing in the candlelight, waiting for someone who never came back. They called it a marriage. But in truth, it was a performance. The bride was 6 years old. The groom was 20-9. Inside the grand cathedral, candlelight danced across golden walls. Nobles stood silently in heavy robes. The air smelled of incense and winter roses. Outside, common people filled the streets, watching the royal parade pass by, but few understood what was really happening behind those towering church doors. A French princess named Isabella of Valois had been chosen to marry the King of England. Her father, King Charles VI of France, had approved it. Her mother, Queen Isabeau, dressed her in layers of velvet and jewels. But Isabella was still just a child, too young to read, too small to carry her own train, too innocent to understand that her marriage wasn't about love, it was about peace. England and France had been at war for decades. The 100 Years' War had drained both kingdoms. Fields were burned, villages destroyed, thousands of men dead. So when Richard II, King of England, asked for peace, the French king agreed, but with a condition. He wanted the alliance sealed with a marriage. Isabella became the price. She was known for her beauty and calm spirit. People said she had golden hair and deep eyes. She liked flowers and painting and sitting by the river near the palace. But now she was being handed across the sea like a gift. She had been taught how to curtsy and smile. She had practiced the words she'd say at the ceremony. She didn't fully understand them, of course. She only knew that this man, the one with the long robes and tired eyes, was now her husband, and she would be Queen of England. Richard was no villain. By the standards of kings, he was gentle. He had refused to marry an older princess when he saw her sadness. He had chosen Isabella because she was young and, in his words, soft-hearted. He promised to wait until she was older before acting as a true husband. Many said he treated her more like a daughter, but even so, the imbalance was clear. A man nearly 30 marrying a 6-year-old was not normal, not even for medieval Europe. Some English lords were deeply uncomfortable. They whispered that Richard was trying to distract from his political troubles, that he needed the marriage to win French support, not because he wanted a child bride, but because he was losing control at home. And they weren't wrong. Back in England, Richard's grip on power was weakening. He had exiled nobles, taxed the poor, and ruled through fear and favoritism. His cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, had been sent away. The people were growing restless, but for a brief moment, the wedding brought calm. When Isabella arrived in England, crowds gathered to see her. She rode a white horse, dressed in pale blue silk. She looked like a doll from a fairy tale. Women tossed petals at her feet. Men removed their hats, and Richard smiled for the first time in weeks. He had a queen now, a symbol of peace. He took her to the palace, where she was given her own court. French ladies were brought in to care for her. She had dolls, music, gardens, tutors, Richard would visit her often, speaking to her gently, bringing her gifts. He built her a special residence at Windsor, her own miniature castle. He even ordered a golden cradle, in case she ever bore him a child, but years would need to pass before that. For now, Isabella spent her days learning English and embroidery. She liked to sit by the windows and watch birds. She asked her tutors about the stars. Sometimes she cried at night, missing her mother. Sometimes she dreamed of riding back to Paris. Yet despite the strangeness of it all, she seemed to find some peace. She was treated kindly. She had books and tutors and new dresses each season. She was called My Lady the Queen, and people bowed when she passed. But behind the court smiles, trouble was growing. Richard was becoming more and more paranoid. He had lost touch with his people. His decisions grew cruel. He arrested nobles who spoke against him. He surrounded himself with flatterers, and he began planning a campaign to crush rebellion in Ireland. Before leaving for that dangerous journey, he visited Isabella. He gave her a ring, kissed her forehead, and promised to return. She watched his ship sail away from the coast, waving until it disappeared into the mist. He never came back. While Richard was away, his cousin Henry Bolingbroke returned. With an army, the people welcomed Henry. He promised to end the corruption, to restore order. Many nobles joined him. London opened its gates. And when Richard came back from Ireland, tired and defeated, he was captured. They called it a peaceful transition, but Richard was imprisoned in the Tower, then moved, then never seen again. Isabella was kept under close watch. Her court was reduced. Her French letters were stopped. For weeks, no one told her what had happened. When she asked where the king was, they gave her excuses. Eventually, she learned the truth. Richard was no longer king. Henry was. And soon after, a whisper passed through the palace. Richard was dead. They told her he had starved to death in his prison. Others said he had been murdered. Isabella fell silent. She stopped eating. She refused to leave her room. Her ladies said she sat for hours staring at the same spot on the floor. She was just 8 years old. When the French court learned what had happened, they demanded her return. They said the English had broken their promise. They called it a betrayal. But Henry IV refused to let her go right away. She was now a political tool. Eventually, after months of negotiation, he agreed, but only if she gave up all claims to the English. Thrown in return the dowry. Isabella didn't understand the documents. They made her sign, but she understood what it meant. She was no longer queen. The day she left England, the sky was grey. The sea was rough. She boarded the ship quietly, without ceremony. No parade, no songs. Just the creak of the wood and the cold air on her cheeks as the white cliffs of Dover faded behind her. She whispered a single word, goodbye. Back in France, her family welcomed her with sorrow, not celebration. Her mother wept. Her sisters embraced her. Her father, lost in his madness, didn't recognize her. But Isabella didn't cry. She dressed in black. She refused to attend parties. She said she would never remarry. She was 9 years old and already a widow. Her mother tried to comfort her. "You're still a princess," she said. "You still have a future." But Isabella had changed. She had seen too much, lost too much. Still, time moved forward. When she turned 16, the court arranged a new marriage to her cousin, Charles, Duke of Orleans. He was close to her age, kind, gentle. She agreed. The wedding was quiet. She didn't wear gold. She wore blue. They lived peacefully for 2 years. She became pregnant. She smiled again. She began to believe that maybe, just maybe, a new life was possible. But the past wasn't done with her. She died in childbirth. Her child didn't survive. She was 19 years old. The French court mourned. Her England forgot her. But some still remember the girl queen. The child sent to stop a war. The one who crossed an ocean with flowers in her hair and returned with a broken heart. They say if you walk through the old palace gardens on a cold night, you might hear a soft voice whispering through the trees. A child's voice, still waiting, still remembering, still calling out for someone who never returned.